Hope everyone's enjoying the event so far. Next up, we're diving into the world of asset data. Andy Jackson from IBM knows exactly how owners can turn information into insight and insight into action. He's helping organizations bridge the gap between capital projects and long-term asset performance. Please help me welcome Andy.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate the introduction. Again, my name's Andy Jackson. I'm the Principal America Sales Lead for Maximo and Tri-Riga here at IBM. I've been working in the maintenance and operations space with Maximo for about 22 years now across a number of different industries in the Americas. I'm based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I've got a lovely wife named Liz, a young daughter named Emily, and as a typical Canadian, I like to play golf in the summer and I play hockey in the winter.
Because you can't do either in opposite seasons. Andy, glad you're with us today. Thanks for being part of this conversation. We think it's a very important conversation for our industry, so I'm really glad to have you and the power of IBM that's behind you to be with us today. I want to start off with a very basic question. What do owners use CMMS or enterprise asset management tools for?
Because they need to know where their assets are and what assets they have in order to maintain them to the appropriate level, in order to reduce downtime and keep production as high as possible in order to keep that money coming in. Now, we at IBM know that not all assets are created equal, and each asset class is going to have a different strategy tied to it, which is what you see on the screen here today, a maintenance maturity curve. So on the left-hand side, or the bottom of this particular curve, we see our EAM and our CMMS. Right? As you progress to the right, we get into a reliability-centered maintenance, asset performance maintenance, asset investment optimization, and asset investment planning to ensure that the right strategy is applied to the asset at the right time, again, based on criticality to your business and to your employees and your operators as a whole.
I see. This is where information becomes insight and insight becomes action. So you're using these things not just to be reactive about maintenance and work order type things, but really to plan the life of your asset and to better operate your entire practice, whatever that is.
Correct. We want the owners and operators to be as informed and as proactive as possible, again, based on the industry and the business that they're in.
Well, Andy, you're talking not only with a lot of owner operators today, our audience will have a lot of folks from my side of the fence, which is project folks, designers and constructors. So I want to move next to just define a few terms for us, highlight a few of these. We're going to use a lot of acronyms today, folks, and these materials are available to you afterwards if you need a refresher, but just a few of these that we want to talk through. We're going to talk today about asset data handover, or here on this slide, asset handover. It's simply the process of turning over all the information about critical assets to the owner operator at the end of a construction project. We'll talk about BIM, building information modeling. We'll talk about perhaps common data environments, or I might refer to those as CDEs. Digital twins, simply a virtual representation of a physical reality. And we'll probably use the word taxonomy or data dictionary. And that's just getting our terms standardized and classified so that when me as a designer wants to talk about a piece of switchgear, the constructor talks about with the same terms and the operator uses the same terms, or at least we have a table to connect those terms. So just a few definitions for you today. Now that we've got that little bit of housekeeping out of the way, I want to ask you, Andy, these tools that you described and this wonderful work that you can do, I assume that in order for Maximo or any other CMMS tool on the market, any other enterprise asset management, I assume they need a database before they have much value to your operator.
Absolutely. And typically it's tedious to get that data into the database.
Well, that was the next question. Where does it come from? Because I know as constructors, we don't deliver a database at the end of a project, or at least we haven't until now. So how historically have owners created that database that they need to operate their facility or utility or whatever it is that we've constructed for them?
Yeah, so I mean, like I was saying, typically it's very tedious to get the data into the database. People are either loading it via an Excel spreadsheet or they're logging into the system and entering it a record at the time, a record at a time, I should say. Sorry. Again, it's tedious, and there's a high likelihood of human error getting bad data into the system.
So, what's the consequence if I open a facility and I've got a wonderful tool like Maximo, but there's no data in it? It seems to me I'm flying blind then in operations. What are the consequences of that?
I mean, the consequences could be large, right? So you could have unplanned downtime, and we know unplanned downtime is the most expensive type of downtime.
Yeah.
You could have production outages, right? If you're not producing in many of our industries, then it's a direct hit to the bottom line. You're not making money. There's safety and regulatory risk. So perhaps with a piece of equipment being out, there's a risk of harm or risk of reputation to your organization. Maybe regulatory penalties or fines, right? And warranties is another one. If you're not able to understand what assets you own and the details tied to those assets, such as warranty, you're missing out on a big financial recuperation.
I never thought about the compliance issue, but our healthcare clients go through a joint commission process periodically where their facilities are audited, and I know that they check things like the ventilation systems. So if you don't have good maintenance records, I know they get pinged, they get fined, they can even be shut down. And we've collected over the last couple of years, Andy, we've collected hundreds of horror stories from owners that have, for example, replaced a roof system or a cooling tower that were actually under warranty. They replaced them at their own nickel. I've heard from owners that found out that they had multiple warranties on the same asset. One of my favorite stories is a maintenance worker on the site of a school system. He's in a hole. He's got a pump torn apart trying to fix something. And the director of capital programs walks by and the maintenance worker asks, "Do you think this thing's still under warranty?" The director simply replies, "Not anymore." Because by opening up the pump, he's invalidated the warranty. And again, just hundreds of those stories from curtain walls needing to be replaced because wrong solvents were used to clean them. Horror stories because the owner didn't have the data in an accessible format or in that Maximo database the way they needed it. So, I contend, Andy, that FMI, the Fails Management Institute, did a study, and I think this is where the nature of our problem comes from. They found out in talking to constructors and designers and the owners who we hand this data over to, your clients, they found out that 96% of all the data that we capture during design and construction actually goes unused. I
I'm
contend
surprised.
I contend it's because of the next thing that they documented was that 90% of all that we collect, we do so in a way that is unstructured. So what we've done historically is provide your owner with a thumb drive or some media with, I don't know, 100,000 PDFs and 1,000 spreadsheets, and your owner operator generally throws that in a file somewhere and then starts from scratch, as you said. So
Yeah.
this was something that I had not heard before. 13% of all of our engineering construction hours are spent looking for project data that should be at our fingertips. And then finally, I'll share one that's not from the FMI study, but actually from one of our clients. The Mayo Clinic did an audit of what they received on the thumb drive and found that they only received 40% of what their contractual obligation from their construction team was. So because we never look at the thumb drive, because we throw it in a drawer and forget about it, they didn't actually know how much of what they were getting. They went to the trouble to audit it and found that only 40% of what they're supposed to get are they receiving.
So, Nick, I mean, we for decades have had technology that helps owners manage their assets and operate their assets. You come from AEC that also has for decades
Yeah.
had a great technology to assist project teams. How do we get that big disconnect?
Well, let's step back in time from when we went from putting all this on paper. And at the end of a project, Andy, my folks would deliver to your folks literally a truckload of paper in the form of plans and specs and O&M manuals and cut sheets and warranty information, all kind of stuff. But it was all very paper. But that was in the day when, as a young engineer on Friday, every Friday, I'm making 14 sets of every drawing that I'm working on, because I've got to send the other 13 cents around the country to other disciplines, the owner, the architect, other engineers that are going to redline these things. And when we redline them, we have to redline 14 copies. So, it was a terrible way. And I was part of the team that brought project management to the internet. So the founders of Kahua, if you didn't know, were the founders of a company in the 90s called Constructware. It was the very first project management system that was internet-based. Revolutionary idea at the time. Some people thought we were a little crazy, but some ideas are too good. And before you knew it, all of the competitors were also rushing to bring their product online. It was just too smart to be able to collaborate online, to see things, automatically route things to one another, and not have to rely on faxes or couriers. So when we did that, we began the digital transformation of our industry. But in doing that, we also created a problem of data ownership. If one person owns a website with all the project data, only one person owns the project data. That was a problem that we created. It was also a delivery problem. We're going to deliver that electronic data in a different way now. But the way that your team, your operators needed it was in the form of a database and data fields, if you will. What we were delivering basically was electronic paper, PDFs, plans, CAD drawings. So we just never made that connection as we should. And there were attempts to make that better. There have been other things that have come along. When Constructware was a new company and just beginning this process, BIM was a baby. We thought that modeling was going to be the way that we could deliver this information to owners. And I was a CAD manager in those days. We thought that the BIM model would be the answer to everything in operations. It just hasn't panned out to be that way. It's a great tool. It has a usefulness, and I think it will continue to grow in value. We couldn't do construction without BIM today, but owners aren't really using BIM in their world as operators, with some exceptions, I know, but generally it's true that owners don't use a BIM model to operate and to use tools like Maximo.
No, I agree 100% with you. I don't see BIM and digital twin being quite as mainstream today as I expected it to be, which as a result puts emphasis back on having strong, clean data tied to your assets and your maintenance plan so that you can maintain and operate that equipment to the best of your ability.
Well, you said it in the opening, we said it about you and about IBM. Information leads to insight, and insight leads to better action. So we've talked a lot about the problem of not getting you the data. Let's talk a little bit about the solution, because I know you can do marvelous things if we can give you good data. What is it in the form of data that the owner operator needs? What exactly do they want in this data or this database?
So if we look at the asset itself, you got to start with the asset and a description of the asset. And you know what, Nicholas, it may just be better just to show you versus tell you about it, right?
Okay, I think we have a clip, don't we?
I think so. I hope so.
For today's demo, we'll be looking at a sample asset called Column Oven 1001. This is an example that I've used in a previous client demo. When we open the asset record, we arrive at what I consider the core of Maximo. Why? Because this single record holds everything you need to know about this particular asset. It acts as a centralized, unified source of truth. And as we scroll down through the record, you'll see the basic information like the asset's location, the ID, and whether it's marked for calibration. You'll also see where we can input attachments such as manuals or SOPs or any documents that pertain to the asset. Going further, we can see more details dealing with maybe calibration history, life cycle status, and even the financial information. The true value of this interface is that it serves as the command center for this piece of equipment. It tracks the life cycle, the health, the configuration, and more. And it's a standardized, centralized, built to scale, exactly what a modern EAM solution needs. And as a bonus, if you already have existing ERP,
That's really helpful, Andy. And hey, shout out to the Maximo guy. You can find him on YouTube. So we're glad to share a bit of his clip with us today. And that was helpful, Andy. I see now what we're looking for is really some pretty simple data along with some attached documents probably.
You're bang on, right? So in this case, or in the screenshot that you've got on the screen currently, you can see that we've got an asset number 11300, and it's a reciprocating compressor. You can see its location, you can see its serial number, priority, vendor, manufacturer, installation date, purchase price. All that information can be entered into the system to support enabled, educated downstream decisions from a maintenance and operations perspective.
And all that information is something that, as a designer, as a constructor, those are things we collected along the way. You know, I love this thought of continuing to enhance the data. And that's the approach that we're trying to take at Kahua. And I'll start with my own story, Andy. As a young engineering designer, if I saw a set of site plans, floor plans, the first thing I'm going to think is, as an electrical guy, I'm going to think I'm going to need switchgear on this. And I'm going to use that Siemens piece that I used on my last job, and I'll use a medium voltage, and I'll use air insulated. Well, I've just authored 3 pieces of information that your operator is going to want: a manufacturer, a capacity, and the insulation type. So why should anyone ever have to look for that information again? What do I do with that as an engineer? Generally, I'm going to put that into a spec, or perhaps I create a submittal registry out of it. Well, doing either of those actions in Kahua allows me to document that and tag that to an asset registry. The information that FMI shared with us and the stories from hundreds of owners, we've kind of determined that the problem's not in handover, it's in collection. We've got a collection problem. And that's why we're promoting this new methodology we refer to as Asset Centric Project Management. It's just what I explained, Andy. It's the fact that along the way of design and construction and planning and installation and procurement and commissioning, I gather more information about the assets that your operator wants. We've just enabled our technology to allow us to tag that information to the asset registry. So it's very handy. It's very easy. It takes no more effort on the designer's part, no more effort on the contractor, subcontractor's part, or the commissioning agent's part. They're already collecting that information. And now I'm doing it in a way that it captured it as data that I can then create the Maximo database from, or at least give you a data set that you can create it from day one.
Makes sense.
And Andy, the beauty is that this info can be delivered directly into the owner's tool set, whether it's Maximo or some other tool. We can do that at any point along the way. We can do it as I ideate that information as an engineer, or we can wait till the end of the project. Whatever the owner operator wants, we'll deliver that information in the form of data instead of on a thumb drive, as in the form of a bunch of PDFs.
Awesome. So question for you, Nick. How do we get there? How does the owner operator organization get started with this asset centric approach? My people need this from your people. How do we get that? How do we get there?
Great question. And it's probably the most important thing we're going to talk about today. Andy, I think it starts with the owner operator. Now, there's a method for this, and we have a consulting effort that we go through on this. But generally speaking, what Kahua needs is an asset registry. Before the project begins in earnest, we're gonna ask the owner operator, what kind of assets are you putting into place? I think that process most of the time, Andy, is going to be looking at the asset registry in Maximo for their similar building and taking a copy of that and bringing that into Kahua so that we can at any point say, I want to tag this asset to this item in the asset registry. It's a setup process. It happens really before project users are in. So it will happen from owner operator staff, or it will happen with them and with Kahua administrators. What I'm trying to emphasize is this is not something that a project manager has to deal with. It's not something a project engineer is going to know about. It's not something the job site superintendent, project manager, or foreman, those folks are never going to know there's such a thing as the asset registry, except that now and then they tag an asset to a list of assets that we created ahead of time. So it's really no extra effort for the project staff. There is a little bit of administrative setup up front. And again, that's probably going to replicate what's already been done in the CMMS or the Enterprise Asset Management tool. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense. And by the sounds of it, it sounds like there's just a little bit of work that's done up front. And then you can reuse and recycle, rinse and repeat that same template inside that same industry again and again. So the second, the third, the fourth time are just that much easier and that much more efficient in gathering the data and getting it into a system like Maximo.
Because the next patient building at a hospital is going to be very, very similar to the last patient building that we did. The next high school is going to be very similar to the last high school. The next pill factory for a pharmaceutical is going to be fairly similar to the last one that they did. So yes, that gets a little easier. So that was my answer in kind of the how-to. I'll tell you the other answer though is how do we get there? Owners have to begin to demand this in their contracts. It has to be part of their contract language, and it has to be specifically spelled out. So I've described a little bit of the process to you, but I'll tell you, I'll again go back in history and back up a little bit and talk about what we learned in the past. So at that company Constructware, which we grew up and sold to Autodesk in 2006, and a few years later, when Autodesk decided not to carry Constructware forward as a product line, our founders decided we'd start over. We built Kahua, built it from scratch, knowing now what we did not know then. So we've done something really special here. We knew what hurdles to avoid. But in that first company, in Constructware, one of the things that we learned when we sold to both owner and contractor was that we have to be specific. If the owner simply demanded that their team used Constructware, well, all it meant was that somebody on the construction side had to log in occasionally. We didn't tell them exactly what to do. They could say that we used it if they logged in. So we learned to create a communication specification, which became part of their contract. It became an addendum to their contract. Not only do you use Constructware, but you use it this way. We do the same thing at Kahua. We create a communication specification that says, this is how you use Kahua for these things and in this way. We'll do the same with Asset Centric. We'll create a playbook that becomes an addendum to a construction contract. You need to provide me this information. You need to provide it in this way. And these are the specific things I want. These are the attributes I want about my equipment. These are the documents that I need an O&M manual and a cut sheet and some warranty information and maybe a training document. So all those things are spelled out. So the construction team knows way ahead of time what they have to deliver. And as we are designing and constructing, we simply tag to the asset registry what we've already put in the system. So it's really beautiful, but it starts with the owner demanding what they want. Andy, I want to jump in and offer a story that extends the value of this conversation and talk about some things that we're doing on your side of the fence. So understand, we're project folks, we're design and construction. We want to turn a project, we want to get it done and turn it over to you as soon as possible. But we've begun to bleed into your space simply in the fact that we've created a facility condition assessment tool in Kahua. All right, what does that mean to our audience? If you're not familiar, it's just that. I go and assess the condition of my facility. I assess the condition of the assets in my facility. Why do we do that? Because our institutional owner clients, universities, healthcare systems, government agencies, education systems, those that are habitual builders and have to go and ask for funding before their next capital program, they have to justify that funding. And they do that by saying, this is the current facility condition. We've got, let's see, if I was a school system, I've got 100 buildings and 10 of them really need some work done. And another 20 need some work done before too long, or it's going to be a big problem. The other 70 are in good shape. So they do this facility condition assessment to judge where they are and what they need to do going forward. It was natural for us to create this tool for them upon request, I should say. So we've created a tool that they can go out and look at all their other facilities besides the one that they just completed in Kahua. They can look at everything and do this condition assessment. Well, that helps us, and it allows the owner operator to get all that asset information if they didn't already have it. So if it's a new client to us and they've done one facility in Kahua, well, that's great. We turned over all the information, but they look back at us and say, Nicholas, I have 99 other facilities. How do I get this information on those? So we've created a facility condition assessment tool that would help a new client to Maximo gain the 99 other buildings, that database that they needed. Does that sound like something that would help the folks that you work with day in and day out?
Yeah, no, that sounds like a great tool and a way to expedite getting the assets, the data, the locations, and all the supporting information that they need in order to, again, maintain those buildings.
Well, Andy, I just going to ask one more question. It's my favorite question, kind of my traditional question at the end of a podcast or a webcast.
Sure.
I want to ask you simply, if people wanted to learn more about enterprise asset management, not specifically about Maximo, where would they go? What's a good resource for people to learn about your business? And then, of course, I do want to ask, where can we go to learn more about IBM Maximo and the power it brings for an owner operator?
Yeah, so if a customer wants to learn more about enterprise asset management, there's a wealth of information on the internet. And as part of the IBM website, we've got a lot of information on what we call asset lifecycle management and the tools or components within the IBM walls that help our customers do just that, maintain that asset from cradle to grave. Now, from a Maximo perspective, if you really want to get some additional information, again, plethora of information on the IBM website, lots of information, as you saw, on YouTube. And there's a number of other sources that it can be leveraged in order to get you the information enablement or details that you need to better understand how Maximo functions inside the maintenance and operations space.
All right. Well, Andy, can't thank you enough for being with us today. Can't thank IBM enough for being such great partners to Kahua. This is exciting that we can do this for our mutual clients, that we can deliver this information in a seamless way that lets you have the data you need from day one. You can learn more about Kahua's Asset Centric Project Management methodology simply by going to kahua.com, look for the Solutions tab, and then you'll see the Asset Centric Project Management tab as well. Look there. We'll put some additional links into the chat as well. Thank you all for being with us for this session. Andy, it's been great. Appreciate it very much, man.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.